Hello again. This segment, episode 7, will address two things. It will address the 6970 wedge, the only low bounce wedge during the 20-year period. There were a lot of, I should say, consistently low bounce. Most of the 66 through 68s were low bounce, but there were some high bounce mixed in. But this, as far as I can tell, was consistently low bounce. You can see the stampings, they're distinctive. Unlike others, staff model is stamped on there below the word Wilson. Wilson has a low L in Wilson, not the tall L from the black dot irons before 1960. You've got the word Dynapower on there. You've got a completely conventional sole stampings. It says sand wedge and fluid feel. The grooves are notable for two reasons. For one, they're very deep, and that can give you confidence when you go to buy a wedge from this year, because they're likely to still be strong because they were so deep. The second thing is that you've got diamonds at the end of each groove, and that was true, I think, in 67, 68 as well, and will continue to be true going forward in the future. The diamonds replace the loving cups. So good wedge, swing weight of E2, plenty heavy, and I've played it. It's a wonderful wedge. It's the wedge that spurred me on to buy all of the Wilson Dynapowered wedges that I now have. This was the first one I ever purchased. Bought it from a fellow in Pennsylvania, paid quite a bit for it, I think about $70, which was higher than the price on many years. I've talked earlier about the affordable ones between 66 and 68, and to a lesser extent between 62 and 65. But this one goes up a little, and I think it's worth it. It's especially if it has a steel shaft. 68 through 70 were years when they also had aluminum shafts, and I've mentioned that those sometimes would bend at the hosel. So aluminum came into disfavor and was not used after 1970, the year of this wedge. But that brings us to the question of reshafting these clubs. It's not terribly difficult to reshaft them for a professional to do that. There's no pin in the hosel on these years. The pins were not used after 1961. If you do reshaft, there are a couple questions you probably want to clear with the club maker before you go ahead. You want to know what they're going to do about the red plug, or if it's an older club, the black plug that's in the sole. Some club makers are reluctant to commit to either preserving it or replacing it. Instead, they'll want to epoxy over the hole or something like that. I don't like that very much. It seems very inauthentic. I like more authenticity. But both the Iron Factory and Golf Works, located in Colorado and Ohio respectively, will put a rubber plug in, and I think one of those two, I don't remember which one, doesn't have a black rubber plug. It'll always use a red rubber plug. So one of my 58s that has been re-chromed now has a red rubber plug, which is deviating a bit from the inauthenticity. If you've got a pin in the hosel, I think you want to get a commitment from the club maker that they will use the pin and restore it, so that you don't have this hole that's unfilled sitting in the hosel. You want the pin to be used even with the new shaft. When you reshaft, of course, you're going to have to commit to club length, what you want the finished length of the club to be. That's easy enough. You take a wedge that you like and maybe take that into the club maker and say, I want it to be the same length, and that's easily done. The old clubs had a 340 tip, dot 340. The newer shafts are 355 or 370. Not a problem, at least not for the 355s. They just drill out the 340 a little bit, and then they're able to make the install. You'll probably have to pick a new ferrule. You can either do all black, which is kind of what is very popular on high-end clubs. If you buy set of Titleists, they are all black. They just have that lower piece without the rings that you see here, or the top black ring. Or maybe you want them to do their best to put rings on it that will come as close as possible to the original rings that were present. Your call. But that's one thing you'll want to discuss. So going back to the 69, it's one of my favorite wedges, the first one I ever bought. It's self-aiming. It was actually used by Sam Snead. I saw online one of these that I think it had a little custom grinding done on it. The pros always like to fiddle with their clubs. But it was one of these, and it was owned by Sam Snead with a letter of authenticity coming along with the purchase. Don't know how much it went for. I would say that these wedges, whether or not they come from Sam Snead, are hard to find. A little hard to find, and they're a little pricier. There's one up on eBay right now for $99. Sometimes if the seller doesn't know what he's got, you'll see them, for less than that. That's my advice. Great wedge if you happen to find it, and it's going to be low bounce, I believe. With that, we will sign off, and I'll see you next time in episode 8, where we will discuss the 71, 72, and also in that same segment the 73 through 75, and then we're done with the discussion of sand wedges, 75 being the last year of the Dynapower line that I want to discuss. And we'll move on from there to talk about triple duty and dual wedges in more detail. I mentioned them earlier, but those were the companion wedges that were marketed. And then we'll do a segment on pitching wedges, which are definitely worth talking about. You might think they aren't, but they're definitely worth talking about, because those wedges, at least in the early years, had no or negative bounce, and you don't see that nowadays. And I think that's advantageous to have. Because you can pick the ball out of a bad lie with when it has no bounce or negative bounce. But we'll talk about that, and I'll show you some of the pitching wedges from the Dynapower line. I don't have all of them, but those can be picked up very cheaply. And so I think that segment coming up 2 or 3 down the road is definitely worth your while as well. Thank you very much.